as part of their external audit process. In addition to these new regulations, there has been unprecedented budgetary pressure, which has focused senior management on support services to protect fundraising positions. It's up to us to demonstrate that we understand the situation and are moving to a more efficient, cost-effective operation. It is the greater awareness of the role that support services must play in enabling fundraising programs to be more effective that is creating the sense of urgency. Debbie will address the need for a plan to provide the context for this improvement.
That's right, Charlotte. It starts with a plan. It's so important for the support services units like gift processing to have an annual business plan to operate from. You've heard the saying, if you don't prioritize your work, someone else will do it for you. Well, I don't think any of us want to be in that position. Having a business plan and communicating the plan will allow you to focus on the initiatives for your operation that create efficiencies and reduce costs. Too often, I find gift processing operations that have not gone through the business planning process and ask themselves how and where can they improve. These operations are functioning in a reactionary manner because they did not take the time to learn what other advancement programs are planning to do to accomplish their goals during the year. So, for example, if you know that the annual giving program is planning to increase their e-solicitations by several thousand donors this year and direct them to the online giving site, you could plan to work with the IT people to ensure that the transactions could be loaded electronically instead of manually. You could also have the forethought to say, hey, maybe we should plan to send e-receipts to these donors to reduce the printing and mailing costs. And that would be another initiative that you could sponsor in your office that would complement the annual giving strategy. Now we're going to discuss best practice performance standards. In the previous slide, I said your plan should evaluate the performance at the individual and the unit levels. And here are some examples of metrics you can use to monitor that performance. At the individual level, you can look at the number of transactions processed by each of your staff members and the percentage of transactions that require adjustments. By monitoring the number of transactions by each staff member, you can quickly see who your high performers are and who are not. I suggest once you have set goals for staff performance, you meet with them monthly to review where they are and how they can improve. At the unit level, you should be monitoring the time it takes to process a gift. Many places give me, I think it takes about 3 to 5 days. Well, you really should be able to measure that with data coming off of your fundraising system. You should know also the cost of how much it costs to process a transaction. And you should be calculating this annually to know if the cost is going up or down. This metric will reflect if your business plan is effective. If the costs are going up, look at the percentage of transactions you receive electronically, because once you implement an electronic solution, these transactions should cost much less. Charlotte's going to talk a little bit more about performance standards.
Debbie has identified the most important metrics. The next step is to identify standards against which the numbers are measured. Measures of productivity. Once these measures of productivity are established, they should be written into job descriptions and monitored. Information about these measures should come from the database so that there is transparency about how they have been developed. Measures of productivity include time management so that all of the work of a staff member is captured. One major institution has implemented time accounting software so that every person must record in detail daily activities and work products. Accuracy. Of course, accuracy in data capture depends on the accuracy of the information provided with the transaction. Here we focus on data capture errors that the processor could have avoided. How many gifts one processes and how many errors are made must go hand in hand. Debbie will talk about this more in a bit. Timeliness. Timeliness has high visibility and is important to customer satisfaction with your operation, institutional staff, and donors. There are challenges in large institutions where fundraising is decentralized and documents frequently arrive elsewhere. This is especially true where there is a large medical system associated with the institution. Sometimes the impediments are from the finance area, where a new fund is required or a gift designation is challenged. These delays must be addressed if the process is to become more efficient. Policies and procedures, they are not the same. Policy is defined at the macro level, procedure at the micro level of database field management. There are very few institutions where we have found documented gift processing policies and procedures. What we see most often is a document that describes how to enter gifts in the database. We recommend that policies and procedures be defined and be put into cheat sheets where they're available for review for specific situations. Few people read manuals. In addition, there should be an institutional gift acceptance document that is familiar to your staff so that there's a holistic understanding of the rules of the game. Flexibility. The ability to move to different assignments has been a keystone of corporate management learning from Japan, where performance is judged by your ability to do different jobs as needed. We talk about this in a bit as a management imperative. Here we focus on a staff person's ability to move where needed. Performance standards are equally important for managerial positions. A few years ago at an Information Week conference, I heard Jack Welch respond to a question about the most important thing he did as head of General Electric. His immediate response was that he instituted monthly reviews for each staff member that resulted in a plan for improvement in the next month. Waiting until the end of the year deprives you of the opportunity to take corrective actions in a timely fashion. So we identify the metrics and establish our standards. How do we get the data? When we do a gift processing audit, we take 1 full year's worth of transactions, gifts, pledges, and adjustments, and analyze them in various ways, many of which are demonstrated in today's charts. It's always interesting to see how different the reality is from the initial description of the operation that we received. The data provide the what is to compare to the what should be. This chart shows in living color each processor's contribution to the work of this institution each month. Here we can see 3 processors are doing the bulk of the work. The 4 additional people, less so. This is one of the many ways that you can look at productivity. Of course, all of the information that we collect with our analysis support recommendations about staff size. In the chart that you see before you, we have demonstrated one way of looking at this. Metrics must be judged by performance standards. Here we've established a standard that a processor should handle at least 100 transactions a day, and furthermore, that a processor should be able to handle 100 annual fund transactions within 2 hours and 100 more complicated transactions within 4 hours. Needless to say, we run into significant pushback from processing staffs that say this is impossible. However, recently we were working at one institution where we were working directly with each staff member to understand why it wasn't possible, and within 1 week they were processing at this rate. This table shows how many staff members would be required at each of the 11 institutions in the study if processing were at 100 a day per full-time equivalents. Each cell has within it the number of people that would have been required to handle the transactions at 100 a day. Note that here we're looking at all the transactions as if they were manual. Of course, electronic feeds would be handled much more expeditiously. With one exception, first, let me stop and look at one column to make sure you understand what I'm talking about. In column 1, in each cell, we see the number of people that would have been required each month if they were handled at 100 a day per FTE. The range for this institution is 1 to 7. Underneath that, the number 15 is the actual number of positions that are associated with gift processing. It's important to remember that when we developed this actual number, we did not include the managerial positions at the institution. With one exception, these numbers show extensive overstaffing, that exception being institution number 5, which shows the impact of automation. If all of these transactions were manual, they would require at least 30 people, and they have actually a staff of 10. Debbie will now take you through the determination of the correct staff size.
Thanks, Charlotte. This is something everyone struggles with. What is the right size staff to process the transactions and the biographic information that we all receive on a daily, monthly, and annual basis? And the most important thing that you need to look at is the number of transactions that you process. When you count this up, it should be all gifts, pledges, pledge payments, and every adjustment, which is, for many people, their reverse modification transactions. You need to count them. They're important. The average number and size of transactions for staff should be looked at as well. You all know that at calendar year end and fiscal year end are peak volume periods for you. If you monitor the daily and weekly rates, you may find some other patterns that emerge. At one institution, we found a surge of gifts being processed the last week of the month. We didn't understand why all of these gifts were suddenly being processed at the last week of the month. And as we drilled down, what we found was the departments only received money in their spending accounts once a month, because that's when gift processing transferred the money to the accounting system. There was no motivation for the departmental staff to process those gifts and get them to gift processing until the end of the month, so they were not a high priority. We worked with them and recommended that they now begin to feed the information on a nightly load to the accounting system in order to help motivate those department staff. But we could not have found that out if we hadn't looked at all of the transactions that were processed on a weekly and monthly basis. Automated transactions take approximately one-third of the time to process than those manually. So you need to keep that in mind as you're looking at the number of transactions. What percentage can be automated or are automated? And then you also need to look at the percentage of high value or high dollar gifts, because these are more complex and usually are processed manually. They usually take longer because they're designated to multiple funds, they have multiple donors associated with it, and multiple soft crediting issues. So you need to understand the total of these transactions that fall in your overall count of transactions. Some things that you should be considering when you look at this number is the percentage of tribute gifts. If you are a hospital, healthcare organization, medical center, you receive a large amount of tribute or an honor gifts. These require special handling and multiple steps for your processors to input. Review your business rules. I mentioned soft credit in the last slide. Review your business rules for assigning joint or soft credit. In some institutions, the processors literally have to go through a decision tree exercise to decide who should get soft credit. This slows down the process every time, and it increases the adjustment rates because inevitably they get it wrong. In regard to credit card gifts, more often than not, the donor will not have their ID available when they make their gift online. What this means is that someone's going to need to do a search in your database to find that donor. And if they're not there, they're going to need to add them in. Again, multiple steps. Now, we have found that there are software packages available to help with this matching process. Penn State has told us that they are using a software called DataFlex to successfully dedupe records that they're loading into their system, parents and alumni. They're testing this on the donors from the online site. Reconciliation between the credit card vendor, the bank, and what's entered in the database also takes more time to process. To that end, Charlotte's going to cover cross-training your staff.
Here we have further evidence in favor of flexibility and a deployable staff. This table demonstrates how volatile the workflow really is. Each cell shows the percentage of the transactions for the year that are processed each month by each institution in the study. Cells of 10% or more are highlighted. Note that we have forced all of these institutions into the same fiscal year, which is not actually the case. So the high volume cells that look unusual are attributable to that fact. This volatility leads us to the efficiencies of a cross-trained staff, where the people who work on biographical record changes and the gift processors become one staff. This chart shows the benefits of having a cross-trained staff where management can move people to where they are needed. In the absence of a cross-trained staff, management is staffing gift processing for the peaks or using temps to fill the gaps. Neither are as cost-effective as cross-training. The topic of cross-training frequently becomes heated. We have seen totally integrated staffs at one end of the continuum and two separate staffs reporting to separate managers in separate units at the other end, with two separate staffs reporting up to the same senior manager in the middle. Cross-training is important not only as a theory, but how we do it. It's more than helping out on other assignments when needed. In places where the separate biographical data entry staff is enlisted to help in peak periods, it is typically viewed as doing them a favor. This is quite different from having everyone trained to do both, working in both areas year-round, focusing on what is needed at the time. Everyone should be trained to do both bio and gift assignments, and it should be written in their job description. Note that this recommendation doesn't mean that specialty assignments should go away. However, specialty assignments should have backups so that there is never a single point of failure. Debbie is now going to talk about the benefits of automation.
Right. We've touched on this already, but as you can see by this chart, if we look at the institution's total number of transactions and the percentage of automation against the number of transactions per staff member, those institutions that have a high percentage of automation have a much higher percentage of transaction to staff member. If you look at institution K and institution G, you will see this. Coincidentally, those that don't have a high percentage of automation have a low percentage of transactions to staff member. All of our participants, or all of the institutions that we've worked with, report that processing, editing, and loading electronic batches is significantly faster than doing it manually. It is a best practice to automate the interface between the central fundraising database and the calling system database to receive the calling database biographic and gift information electronically. This eliminates the need to rekey the gifts and the biographic information. Frequently, when I look at an institution, I go in and find that they're actually getting hard copy reports in gift processing from the calling system and rekeying in everything that has been keyed in already in the calling system into the fundraising database. This is just not necessary. If we can load data from our fundraising system into the calling system, we should be able to pull it back out and load it into the fundraising system. Although the workload, from a workload standpoint, the data shows that the electronic transactions are faster to process and have reduced adjustment rates, we have not been able to see the same correlation between the number of transactions per processor or gift turnaround time with higher degrees of automation as we would have anticipated. When we've drilled down on that, what we have found is frequently there are other workflow issues that limit the staff's productivity. This chart just shows you the percentage of automation versus the percentage of manual transactions at each of these institutions. As you can see, there are 3 institutions who are processing more transactions electronically than manually. At many of these institutions, they are only automating a subset of the transactions that could be automated. Charlotte, will you discuss areas where processing managers should think about automating processes?
Thank you, Debbie. For those of you who are not familiar with desktop deposit, a machine is provided by your bank or your ACH provider that sits on a desk with a very small footprint into which checks are fed. This is a wonderful way to add automation to an otherwise manual and time-consuming process. The money is deposited into your bank account immediately. A digitized image of the check is maintained in a file and can be transferred to you on a CD. The check is made not negotiable. Most institutions keep the checks until the end of month closing and then shred them. This process has eliminated courier costs and fulfills the data protection laws of most states. Bank lockboxes have been implemented in many institutions whereby the annual giving remittances and membership renewal forms are sent to the bank, which provides an electronic file of the transactions and digitized images of the checks and donative documents. The cost for these services widely varies as they are closely tied to your institution's banking arrangements. Some institutions, such as Penn State and the University of Rochester, have implemented internal scanning and electronic capture processes. Scanners are at the desk of the processor. Dual screens are provided. Another way of automating is to decentralize credit card processing so that they happen at the site in your institution where the credit card transaction is received, and you can capture it electronically with appropriate controls in place. The University of Pennsylvania has implemented a custom-built web interface for this purpose. Finally, Harvard allows the schools that wish to do so to enter gifts directly into the central database. Full batch control is maintained in the central office, where the batch is closed after it has been reviewed. This process is now becoming even further automated. Gifts of securities present their own special problems. Gifts of securities must be coordinated with brokers, with finance, with Treasury, a manageable process most of the year until December when everyone plays catch-up. The Stanford Management Company has written an access database that is accessible to both the gift processing office and the controller's office. When all the information needed has been posted to the file, that information can be fed into the general ledger and the gift system without additional keying. Debbie will now discuss further opportunities for automation.
Yes, there are. It's interesting. All of you have multiple databases and software used across your institution that capture gift and biographic information. The fundraising database almost always is used to upload this information on a routine basis to these other systems. What frequently is missed, though, is an interface that downloads that data from these systems to the fundraising database. Often I find staff working from hard copy reports or email notifications from these systems, when in fact an interface to load the data from these systems using the exact same logic that is used to write the reports could be done. Another practice that begs review, though, of course, is batch management. And since my colleague, Charlotte, has such a strong opinion on this, I'm going to defer to her.
Thanks, Debbie. Batches are a sore point because the excessive sorting of batches, of transactions into batches, creates management overhead, not only in gift processing, but in the finance office as well. Segregation of transaction types by batch should be limited to those for which there is a business reason for separation. Capturing information in the batch header record is not a good business reason. One institution at which we worked had over 4,000 batches in one fiscal year. We were able to reduce that to 1,000 batches while improving processing turnaround time at the same time. We believe that batches provide the best opportunity to get a good picture of what's happening in your gift processing operation. Maintaining a workload tracking system using batches is the best way to know what work has been received and where it sits in the processing workflow. Some institutions use a whiteboard to show this, using showing all the batches that are in and where they are in the process. Others maintain a system for this purpose using Excel or Access. One institution has created an internal task tracking system in which every batch is logged and can be searched on various criteria. Debbie is now going to address receiving the gifts.
Thanks, Charlotte. This diagram shows us all of the different avenues in which a gift comes into your organization. It also shows us the controls or policies at the top that regulate how we must process that gift. And then if you look at the process actions down below, you're going to see each point at which a gift will be delayed for further review or signature prior to getting entered into the system. And it's that area we want to be cognizant about because frequently that's what causes the most delays. It's for this reason we suggest monitoring the time it takes to process a gift from the time it lands in gift processing to the time the receipt is mailed. The primary reasons that we find for delays in processing gifts is because of incomplete documentation or missing signatures required to create a new fund. In this chart, we took the data from these 12 institutions and measured the time it takes to process a gift at each of these different dollar levels. Most of the institutions process gifts within a 2 to 5 day time frame, which we find acceptable. We believe a 1 to 3 day time frame is a best practice. As you can see, the higher the dollar level, the longer it takes to process gifts because of the amount of documentation required for these high-value complex transactions. But if you look closely at that 500,000 plus level and the 1 million plus level, you can see for a few institutions the time actually goes down. This is because the organization holistically places a high priority on getting these high-value gifts processed. Now, when we look at this in regard to pledges, in comparison to the previous chart, you'll see that pledges at a higher dollar value take considerably more time to process and post in the fundraising system. This is because these pledges require additional documentation. For multi-year pledges, an institution must have a signed pledge agreement from the donor that includes the payment schedule to fulfill that commitment. Charlotte's going to discuss with us now how to get a handle on some of these high-value, complex transactions.
Thanks, Debbie. We have spent many hours at many institutions listening to the complaints that development officers and other senior management officials at the institution have about the time that it takes to get their big gifts, their most important donors, into the system. We believe that we have a solution that works, and that is the development of a tracking system that begins with when the development officer is first aware that the gift is coming in and ends when the gift has been processed. This system has to be accessible to all stakeholders to monitor. We see that each task is put into the system and identified with the name of the person responsible for getting it. In addition to access to the database, we think that regular status reports should be produced and widely circulated so that everyone is aware of the open issues with these important gifts. We also believe that it's a good business practice to use holding accounts or suspense accounts when delays occur in the collection of the information you need to process the gift. Some institutions avoid the creation of holding accounts because of the monitoring required. We do not think that this is a good business practice. High-performance institutions have a process in place to monitor these accounts and to ensure that there is movement to correct documentation deficiencies and move the gift to the donor's designation in a timely fashion. Debbie will now address the troublesome pledge reminder process.
Oh, my goodness, pledge reminders. They can be such a pain, but they're so very, very important. It's no longer sufficient to just have a pledge reminder system. You now have to prove to your auditors that the institution is diligent about trying to collect on these commitments. There are two thoughts on this process, and one is to centralize the reminder production and send them out according to the payment schedules as they are within the database. This works fine for annual giving pledges, but it's not always the right approach for major gift pledges. Another approach that I've seen is to decentralize the process, making the schools responsible for follow-up on these pledges and sending the MSO a list of pledges due this month and let the schools send a reminder letter to the donor. This works as long as the information regarding when the reminder was sent is recorded in your database, because remember, you have to prove to your auditors that the institution is responsible and diligent about collecting on these commitments. We believe the best way to handle pledge reminders is to generate reminders centrally, send them to your development officers who can determine which should be mailed as is and which will require special handling, and then record that information in the system. Another area that we like to look at very in detail is the reversal and adjustment rates at each of your institutions. We've seen this range from 1% to 12% of the total transactions. There are many reasons for adjustments, as we all know. It could be processor error. It can be incomplete information received from the fundraisers or the department financial officers. Those transfers from the holding accounts that Charlotte just talked about are an adjustment. And of course, pledge write-offs. What we believe a best practice adjustment rate should be is 1 to 3% of your total gift and pledge transactions annually. If it's higher than 5%, we suggest that you do a business process review internally to determine why. Where's the breakdown? By coding the reason for the adjustment in your database, you can easily access if you have poor performing staff or if there seems to be some other issues that are requiring these adjustments. It could be a mailing that went out with the wrong appeal code. We need to then go back to the annual giving people or the mail house and make sure that that is not happening again. Managers can use the adjustment rates to determine how and why they have problems. Running the adjustment rate for each of the schools or departments has been very enlightening at one institution. We were able to identify those schools that were very diligent about completing all the paperwork and those that weren't, because the ones that weren't very diligent about getting all the information to the processing staff had a much higher adjustment rate on their transactions. This gave the manager of gift processing the information she needed to garner support for stronger training and outreach programs on gift administration to the departments. 2 institutions we've worked with have implemented a system to capture the adjustment requests electronically. Users get a daily gift report. Many of you send these out yourselves to all of the development officers. The users can then click on the transaction that they would like to have adjusted, and a adjustment request form pops up that they are able to fill in and submit. At 10, it's actually possible to track where the request is in the queue, assign a priority, and see when it's been completed. Here's an example of the adjustment rates for the institutions that we were working with in a recent benchmark study. And as you can see, it goes between 1% to 12%. Another area that seems to require endless amounts of time from staff are reconciliations. And for that, I'm going to hand this back over to Charlotte.
System reconciliations are done in many ways at each institution. At some institutions, the burden of the work is balanced on the finance side. At some institutions, it's balanced on the gift processing side. Reconciliations with finance, with the bank, with credit card vendors can take an inordinate amount of time if not supported by programming that eliminates the need for manual efforts. At one institution, 10 days a month are spent in gift processing working on reconciliations with finance. Reconciliation of credit card transactions is especially troublesome because of timing differences. And pledge receivables is another time-consuming process. Using a data warehouse, if one is available, to capture information from all of the sources in one place allows most of the reconciliation work to be automated. Where a warehouse is not available, a table can be created within the fundraising system to accomplish the same thing. This is a prime example where manual effort adds no value. Debbie will now discuss some others.
Okay, so we've given you metrics to measure your operation by and staff. Now comes the hard part, identifying and eliminating practices that add no value. These are the things we do because, well, we've always done them, or we're doing them because 10 years ago something slipped through the cracks and we got in trouble for it. For example, those organizations that are still making copies of checks and other gift documentation to circulate to development staff, well, frankly, I suggest you just stop that. This is a practice that was being done back in the 80s because staff did not have access to this information easily, and they didn't have the information at their desktops that they do today. In fact, if you're copying checks, this is a security risk, similar to keeping copies of credit card numbers and expiration dates in a file in a locked cabinet in your desk. No one is really doing that now, are you? Multiple reviews of batches prior to posting is another example of where you should be evaluating to determine what is the value added here. If you monitor your staff error rate well, this shouldn't be an issue. I've heard from shops that say gifts over a specific dollar threshold must have 3 or more reviews prior to posting in the fundraising system. If you've lined up all your documentation well at the beginning of the process, multiple batch reviews should not be necessary. So I ask you to ask yourself these questions. Why did you start that practice? Have we resolved the initial issue and can we eliminate it now? If I eliminate it, what will happen? And then I challenge you to actually eliminate a practice that you're not sure about for a week and see who calls you. Now, what it comes down to, bottom line, is how much does it cost your institution to process a gift? And as you can see here from these institutions on this chart, it varies widely from $2.58 on up to $18.21. By taking the total salary and benefit costs for your staff, adding in other program costs like paper, mailing costs, etc., and dividing this by the number of transactions you process annually, you can arrive at this cost for your institution. When you do this and you want to compare it, say, to this chart, it's important to take into consideration where your organization resides, because the cost of living will vary quite a bit. If you live or your organization is in New York City, your cost of living is, say, much higher than Manhattan, Kansas. Even so, we believe the cost per transaction should be in the $5 or below range if all of the gift processing operation is functioning optimally. Well, we hope that during this presentation you found some tools and tips to help you work smarter. And now we have a few minutes left over for questions. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Charlene and Debbie. We have a few minutes left for questions, so feel free to keep sending them in using the chat function on your screen. Any questions that we do not get to today, we will have Charlotte or Debbie reply back to you later in the week. Now let's dive right in. Debbie, when you calculate the number of processors needed at 100 transactions per day per processor, does that take into consideration the need for these same staff to also process biographic updates as well?
Oh, thanks, Stephanie. That's a great question and something that we come across frequently when we share this type of information with our clients. Yes, in fact, those calculations do include the time it takes to update any biographic information that has come in as a result of the documentation from the donor. So, yes, that absolutely is important, but it is also considered in that transaction count per processor.
Great. And what do you consider an acceptable processor error rate?
An acceptable processor error rate should be no more than 1 to 2%. We prefer to see a 1% error rate. Anything higher is a problem.
It's important, this is Charlotte, it's important to remember that when calculating error rates and doing analysis of error rates, there has to be consistency in the database in the way the reason for an adjustment is coded. Too often we go into an institution and we find that everybody has their own idea of what should be entered as the reason for the adjustment. If you don't have a consistent capture of the reason, you're not going to be able to do the analysis.
Right, and if you send the error back to the processor to process, chances are they're not going to code it as their error. They're going to come up with a different reason. And for that, I actually recommend that you have specific staff within the gift processing operation who do these adjustments and record them consistently depending on the reason for the adjustment.
Great. Thank you, Charlotte and Debbie. When you mentioned specific performance standards to evaluate staff, what performance standards should management be held to?
Well, I talked about building an annual plan.
Debbie talked about developing a plan, and management positions should be evaluated on how well they reach the objectives of that plan in a given year.
Thank you, Charlotte. Couldn't have said it better.
Great. We still have a lot of questions coming in, so we'll try to get through as many as we can. Do you recommend at least one review of the batches?
Debbie?
Yes.
I do recommend that you have at least one review, especially as new staff are coming on board and being trained. I think that once you get to a point with very experienced staff and you've monitored their error rates and they're within the 1% range, I'm not so sure that you really need to continue even one review. But you need to make that call based on the monitoring of your staff's performance.
Great. And Charlotte, many of your recommendations will require programming time. How do we make a case for becoming a priority project?
This is probably the most difficult problem that everybody faces, especially with institutions that are either approaching or in a campaign. The ability for the services and support people to get attention of the programming staff is significantly less. When we do a review, we see that many of our recommendations are not going to happen if there is not programming time. So we try and make a case for either getting our jobs prioritized or bringing in contract programmers to do our specific work because of the money that will be saved on the other end. Debbie?
No, I agree with you. I think the strongest case is to show how much more you will be able to save in terms of cost per transaction for the organization, as well as looking at the efficiencies gained in getting those transactions into the system faster. It's a stronger donor relations operation if you're able to do that.
Great, thank you. And Charlotte, can you explain a little bit more about what is an SAS 112 review and what should we be doing to make sure we're following all of the new guidelines?
Right, thank you. The SAS 112 came in a couple of years ago under the title of controls, and a lot of our clients' gift processing operations have been included in this audit of controls. Where in gift processing, we used to only be concerned with what we called segregation of duties, that more than one person handled the money and more than one person opened the mail. Now it's become much greater. And a SAS 112 audit establishes with your external auditor what they are going to review with gift processing every year. And we recommend that the gift processing operation establish with the auditors what is going to be reviewed in advance of the audit so that they can be prepared for what they're going to be asked about. The other place that we see controls coming into effect is in the increased attention that's given to using the money, restricted gifts, in the appropriate way. It used to be that gift processing wasn't involved in that. We made the right designation, we put the money where the donor wanted it, and then it was somebody else's responsibility to make sure that it was spent properly. Auditors are now taking the position that since we have advancement services become so involved in donor relations and stewardship, that we've kind of crossed that line. And since we are telling donors about how their money has benefited the institution, we do have a responsibility to become involved in checking, in getting some aspect of control over how that money is being expended.
Great, thank you, Charlotte. In regards to time to process a gift, does this include printing a letter and getting it signed as part of getting the receipt out the door?
Actually, it should. Generally speaking, though, what we're calculating is the time that it came into the office and the time the receipt was produced, because we don't usually have much control in gift processing over the person who is going to sign that letter. Most of our clients actually have fairly generic, nice receipts that go out with a printed signature for the majority of their gifts and leave the gift acknowledgement letter process to the Donor Relations and Stewardship Office.
Great, thank you. In regards to the transaction rate, do the processors have any additional responsibilities beyond biographic updates and donation processing?
Frequently they do. They will have responsibilities for scanning documents into the system. Again, those pesky making copy things, you know how I feel about that, copying things. I'd rather see you scan it and put it in the system. They have responsibilities for filing documents. Some actually print the receipts out. So normally they do. 100 transactions a day should not be taking up their entire day. Charlotte, do you have anything else to add to that?
Well, I think that you've covered that well. I think that there are a few places where we see gift processors spending a lot of time working in manual systems, like Debbie referred to the interface with the sponsored research system, and we see a gift processor working in the sponsored research database to identify which gifts have philanthropic value and then tracking the payments received on that. So there are specific other jobs doing, but as we said, a processor should be able to handle 100 gifts a day for an annual fund within 1 hour, 2 hours at the most, and complicated gifts within 4 hours. So there's a lot of time left during the day for those other assignments.
Great, thank you. And we have time for a few more questions. Charlotte and Debbie, is there any software that you recommend to allow accounting software to talk to the donor database to prevent double keying?
Accounting software for the institution?
Yes.
Well, you know, accounting systems are accounting systems. They all do the same thing. And the functionality of the system is governed by the accounting standards boards and all of the rules that they have established. A gift processing system doesn't have to be connected in real time to your accounting system. The only time that we care about it is when about a real-time connection is if there's volatility in the creation of new account numbers and there's a risk that we will select a wrong account number when we're entering it into gift processing. I have never seen that. In years, I have not seen that as being a big impediment. So what the relationship between gift processing and accounting is the feed. And I know of very few institutions where there is not a feed from the gift processing database into the accounting system, stopped either through a holding account process where there is a review or another process that provides time for a review. So the choice of the accounting system doesn't seem to be of critical importance. And we as a firm have always favored best-of-breed fundraising systems rather than integrated systems.
Thank you, Charlotte. And we'll go into our last question. In regards to receipts, should goods and services be included on receipts outside of the gift processing area to be forwarded to gift processing in a more timely manner? I'm sorry, let me do that one again. Can you recommend a plan to have donations received outside of the gift processing area to be forwarded to gift processing in a more timely manner?
Debbie, you talked about that in terms of the electronic transmittal. Every institution has established an electronic transmittal form where they fill out the terms of the gift that they've received, and that accompanies the documentation to the central office. The gift tracking system that we talked about is the best way to have that handled for high-value gifts. It doesn't work with the smaller gifts, but our experience has been that the smaller gifts tend to be sent expeditiously. It's the big gifts where we see hold-up.
However, I have talked with institutions that want to automate that transmittal process. So not only are you filling out the form at the departmental level, it's actually getting fed when you submit it directly into a gift batch for review, and then the processing staff just wait for the paperwork to follow. In that sense, then, we're not rekeying. I hope that answers that question. I'm not sure I fully understood it.
Okay, great. And that'll conclude our session today. Feel free, we have Charlotte and Debbie's email addresses on the screen. Feel free to contact them with any remaining questions you have about today's session. This coming Monday, we will send a recording of the session with the audio as well as the presentation slides, along with a short survey to gain your feedback. Thank you all again for joining us today.